Hello and welcome to Skeindeer Knits. My name is Ellie and I am a Norwegian living and knitting in London. And you can follow me on Instagram under the name Skeindeer, and you can find me as a designer on Ravelry as Skeindeer Knits. But in terms of getting in touch, taking part in knit-alongs, asking questions for the podcast, etc., the Ravelry group Skeindeer Knits is the place to be, and I highly encourage you to take part there. It is the #1 place to find out about, say, knit-alongs that I am hosting. I am hosting a number of knit-alongs right now, one of which is the Vinterfjell knit-along, that is the jumper hung right here. It will end at the end of this month, so do get your entries in time. I have opened a finished objects thread, which, oh, I wish I'd opened that sooner, because that's just the source of inspiration. Guys, I love your color choices, so do go over there if you want to enter your garment. There's one entry per garment, no chatter, just post photos of what you have knitted. That sweater is only eligible. And the other knit-along I'm hosting is the year-long knit-along, which is going to run for the duration of this year, where we just aim to make 6 pairs of colorwork mittens. And there's a third knit-along, and I have something to announce there, because I've been saying I want to close that at the end of the month as well, and that is the Skeindeer sock-along. The way I was thinking was, making my colorwork sock patterns doesn't take that long. Surely people will have finished by now. But what I should have been thinking, and which a lot of you have made me aware of, so thank you, is that sock knitting is great in the summer. People like to carry small projects around rather than huge mohair garments and stuff like that. So I will be letting it last for longer. I don't know how much longer, but at least another month. So it will last at a minimum until the end of July. It might last for the entire summer, so we will end it at the end of August when the second mitten club starts. How about that? I think that sounds good, because I don't really care if you guys make 1 pair of socks of mine or several. I just want people to have time to take part and also have a knit-along that is relevant for what they like to make in the summer, because a lot of us are in the northern hemisphere where it gets warmer this time of year. So I am gonna keep that open for those of you who are traveling and want to bring small projects around that aren't unbearable to work on in the heat. So the Skeindeer sock-along is open indefinitely. So thank you so much for understanding that. The other announcement I have to make, which I am very excited about, is the launch of a pattern of mine. Now, it's been a while since I released a mitten pattern. In fact, I have done mitts, but apart from that, I haven't really done mittens since last year. And one of those mittens was the Snøvotter, that means snow mittens in Norwegian, because I had these published in the Norwegian magazine Bladet Garn. I had the privilege of being included in this magazine. This is their 4th issue, and it was very winter themed, kind of forest, winter, fairy tale, Narnia type aesthetic. And look who's in it! My mittens! They did excellent photography of my mittens, which is still visible from my Ravelry pattern page. And the reason, of course, why I'm mentioning this right now is because I have gained the rights back. So Bladet Garn are very generous when they publish your pattern. You will get the rights back after only half a year, which I think is ridiculous. They could have easily extended that to a year, but who am I to complain, because I get to put this up on Ravelry now, and it's been available for almost a week already, because I realized right after putting up last week's videos. That was a lot of videos. By the way, guys, thanks so much for the feedback on that. If you ever want to have a Q&A in the future, really all you need to do is just put your questions into the thread in my Ravelry group. That's all. Not sure if I'm going to have an open Instagram post the way I did this time, although certainly that gained me a lot of questions. But if you just want to ask anything, you can just put that in the questions and answers thread. Like I said earlier, I want that thread to be for questions suitable to ask on the podcast. I can't really be available to help people with anything knitting. But if you have questions for the podcast, then please do put them there, and we might see another Q&A in the future. I thought about having some questions answered today, but the questions that had been asked in the group weren't something I was able to help people with. I don't have infinite experience with knitting, so hopefully you understand. But yeah, back to these mittens. They are available. So this is what they look like in their full glory. I don't really have much else to say other than I'm really proud of having had these published in a magazine. I I'm so glad to be able to share it with those of you who were not able to get this magazine, because it is only in Norwegian, although still available for purchase, and the future magazines are now also available in English, so that is exciting. And the other exciting thing about these mittens is that they are the only pattern of mine thus far that you can get in both English and Norwegian. And if you guys don't mind, I would actually quite like to know how useful you find that. How many of you Norwegian knitters out there who knows the Norwegian language find it useful that my patterns are available in Norwegian as well, because I haven't really considered that to be worth my time. It takes a lot of time and effort and brain power to translate a pattern, because it doesn't translate directly. There's a lot of knitting terms they're very different in Norwegian and English, and so I have chosen, after careful consideration, not to translate. But because this was already available in Norwegian and I do sell all my patterns in English, this just so happens to be available in both languages. So please do let me know how you feel about Norwegian patterns being available. If you are capable of understanding and following English language patterns, it's a lot of effort for me. That may not be worthwhile for you to have a language that you slightly prefer over the other. So do bear that in mind, but I would really like to know your opinion there. But yeah, these are available on Ravelry. I have a very limited discount code that I always offer early birds of my patterns. I will write that here below. It's basically Summer Snow. But as I said, it's a very limited time code. So if you come and find this video and you find that code doesn't work, it may have expired, because obviously I would like to earn full price off my patterns. But obviously I also want to reward those that buy my patterns early, that make it trend on Ravelry and make more people see my designs and make me able to do this. I've explained that before. That is all I have to say about these mittens. I'm gonna move on to what I have been up to. I will only be discussing one work in progress this episode. I have worked on a ton of things, but they are things that sadly I cannot tell you about yet. I will, not to worry, I will show you all the things, but for the time being I'm simply not able to. So I hope you understand. However, this is something I have been allowed to show you. So it's the Hodgins Joy by Sarah Hatton. I complained a little bit last week just that I wasn't maybe super enjoying the bottom stitch pattern, but I was very excited to try the next stitch pattern, because I tried that on the sleeve and I have now done it on the body, and I am loving this. Absolutely loving it. Look at that. I think the stitch pattern is beautiful and it's fairly mindless, and I'm just zooming through it. Most of this I have just done in a knit night last week, and it's just really nice. It's a nice broken rib pattern with a couple of these slip stitch, tuck stitch, whatever you want to call them, type patterns. And that's how far I worked so far. I need to work up, it's like 30 something, nearly 40 centimeters before I get to do some, you know, armholes and that kind of thing. I have joined this with a steek, which is not how the pattern is written, but I have been allowed to do so. It really makes no difference to the overall work. So here's my steek, but as you will remember from last week, I also had a steek here, which I tried to cut up just to see if it would work, and it totally did. So I did the crochet reinforcement that I've said before is not technically a reinforcement, but it's a stabilizer, you know. It sort of makes things look neat, and you can see it looks quite neat. Some ends are poking out, but that's good. They're poking out from the right side. And it just means that where you cut, it doesn't start flaring. It won't unravel if you're using the right kind of yarn, but it may kind of spread a little bit. And the crochet chain here makes it look a lot more neat, and I can just fold it in and sew it in here, and it won't make any difference to the final garment. However though, I am not doing that yet, because I know I will be picking up button bounds, and if I've sewn in the steek, it will just be a bit difficult to do so. And I am very happy to say that this yarn is very suitable for steeking. That was the main test, the main reason I did this, aside from not enjoying purling. And yeah, totally easy to cut through. I didn't even, you know, soak and dry this, which I usually do when I steek. I just cut through and it was fine. So happy to say that the new yarn lure by the fiber company, which I was given by the fiber company to knit this, it is steekable. And yeah, I'm relying on sunlight today, and that's where we're getting this. It's should have just used my lights. Oh well. And for anyone wondering, I am wearing the Fern and Feather by Jennifer Steingars. As ever, if you have any questions about what I'm wearing, projects you may see in the background, anything I mentioned that is not in the show notes, you will always be able to find them in my Ravelry projects page. So this looks like it's going to be a very short episode, but not to worry, I have a few things that we can talk about today. The first thing is that I have thought about possibly starting a newsletter. The reason for this is that, well, a lot of you primarily only seem to follow me here on YouTube, which is fine. Not everyone uses Instagram, but Instagram is really the place where I announce things, where you can find out about anything Skeindeer related in real time. You know, if you want to know when the pattern comes out, if you want to know when there's a discount code for it or something like that, then you may be too late if you wait for things to come out on YouTube, because that's only once a week, whereas Instagram is Insta, it's every day. So I can understand why you kind of want to keep your social media consumption at a minimum. No judgment there, I totally understand. But it can be a bit frustrating for me when I know that I can't reach the majority of people following Skeindeer when I have something to announce. I have to make a video for people to get the message, because that seems to be the #1 place where all of those that are interested in what I do are kind of converging, because not everyone's on Ravelry, not everyone's on Instagram, but presumably everyone's found me via YouTube. I don't know if I'm explaining this well, but it seems to me that maybe a newsletter is the way to go, because then I can send each and every one of you a collective email whenever there is something new happening. So do let me know what you think about that. I don't intend for the newsletter to just be plain marketing. I'm not really into that. They will obviously include when something new is happening, like having released these mittens. That would be something I would make a newsletter about. And I also kind of want to have them in a bit of a blog format, so something that's a bit in the shape of this is what I've been up to, these are some thoughts I'm having, this is what's going to happen in the next video. Maybe you want to, you know, put in some input there, things like that, because right now I have to know what I'm going to do in the next episode, in the current episode, because if I'm saying, oh, let's say I want to do a Q&A in the next episode, I have to know that already now to be able to tell you guys. That's one example of why it would be useful to be able to reach people regardless of what social media platform they prefer. So do let me know what you think and any other input you may have. I think maybe the way is to start a blog, and the newsletter will essentially be sending that out to people, but the blog will be, you know, not large chunks of text, but enough to like have an update and share something that is perhaps a bit more thoughtful and a bit less frivolous than these videos can be sometimes, because I feel like when I make videos and I record like when I'm still trying to wake up in the morning, and they become a bit too chatty and I'm not thinking, I'm just talking, and it's hard to do both at the same time. So lots of thoughts I'm having. Do let me know what you think in the comment section below or whatever. So yeah, the other thing I wanted to let you know about is that I think they're called the British Knitting and Crochet Awards have now opened their vote. So they have nominated a bunch of yarny related things for knitters and crocheters that you can vote on. And I was made aware of this when I had heard that Perth Festival of Yarn had been listed for one of the major yarny events here in the UK. So do hop on that and cast your vote. I did just go through that myself. It's open until August, I think, or sometime in August 30th, I think. I don't know, don't quote me on that, but it's open for a while, but I suggest you do it right now. And yeah, I just did it myself, and there was a lot in this award vote that I maybe wasn't feeling. There's a lot of stuff there that I did not have any opinions on. I'm not a crocheter. I don't particularly care for the big British commercial brands, so, and also some of them weren't even British. That was a bit odd to me. Anyway, if you don't have any opinions on a particular vote, you can skip it. You don't have to cast your vote in every category. Just go through it and cast your vote where you have strong opinions. I certainly know where I had some strong opinions, and I definitely make sure to vote there. So yeah, that was my public service announcement there. Do go and vote for your favorite British yarny thingy. I do wonder if you have to be UK based to vote. I'm not sure about that, but you will find out if you try to vote, I suppose. Now, finally, I am going to review this book. I was sent this book, I think, back in February or March by Vouge Knitting. This is their new book, Vouge Knitting, the Ultimate Knitting Book. And it is an ultimate knitting book. It is on everything to do with knitting. And the reason it's taken me this long to get the review out is, well, one, my episodes tend to be a bit packed, so I haven't really had time to. And the other thing is that I wanted to properly have time to familiarize myself with this book so that I can give you some thoughtful thoughts about it. And I think I am at that place now. So to give you a bit of a backstory here. Well, first of all, this was sent to me by the publisher, so it's been given to me for free, so I feel like I need to give you a heads up about that. But opinions are, as ever, my own. But yeah, this book is something I've had for a long time. This is the Swedish translation of the previous issue of Vouge Knitting, the Ultimate Knitting Book. It's really nice, both of them. So I kind of have this book already, and I've had actually the English language version as well. And when I ordered it, I realized I already had the same book. I hadn't realized this was actually a Swedish translation of an American book. So I already have some experience with this book. I also want to make you aware that it's not the same as this book. This is Vouge Knitting Knitopedia. These are not the same book. Knitopedia is more like an encyclopedia for knitting. So things are in here in alphabetical order with a short paragraph each. So not the same book, just so you're aware. So this book first came out in 1989. That was the first issue, looking a lot more 80s than this one, which they have now updated for the second time, I believe. They also had an update of that book back in 2002, so they have done their second update now in 2018. And I just want to list a few of the things that they have now updated. There is a hat, glove, mitten and sock design and construction section, which I think is really good. There's a shawl shape design and construction section. There's a section on cables, lace knitting, mosaic knitting, brioche, entrelac, directional knitting and double knitting. And I will quickly go through a lot of these sections and a few other things in this book and share with you what I think. But first of all, some overall thoughts. I have come across a number of people thinking, what is the point of these books anymore? This book made a lot of sense back in 1989, but does it really hold any relevance at this day and age? We have YouTube, we have blogs, we get a lot of this stuff for free on the internet. And often it can be easier to learn from a video than from photo tutorials. And I have two thoughts about this. One is that actually it depends. Some people actually find it easier to learn from photos than from videos. This is just because they find it easier when things are standing still, when they can hold it frozen over several segments in front of them as they're trying it, rather than having to pause and go back and pause and go back. So that's one thing. The other thing, and this is my most major point about that comment, is that we've come to expect that a lot of these things are to be for free. And I personally have issues with that. There's a lot of times me and other podcasters and other public knitting personas online do get requests and to some extent demands about making tutorials, be it video or photo tutorials or other free content, telling people stuff that they can find if they bought books like this. And I think that is something worth paying for and something that is asking a lot for people to do for free. And so I think these kinds of books are relevant. Sure, they may make sense to have in a digital format, maybe even release it as an app format. That would be great. But I have issues with the expectations that the content of this book should be for free. Because yeah, sure, altogether what you find in this book you could find scattered around on the internet for free. But here you get it collected in one binding and you know it's of a high quality. But I'm going to go through this book with you right now and let you know if I think it's worth buying or not. So section 1 of this book is yarns and supplies, and I find it a really interesting section, but again I have some thoughts. First we get introduced to yarn weights. This is illustrated this way, but you also get it again on this page here, and this was already where this book kind of lost me a little, because it introduces a standard yarn weight system and it goes like this: 0 lace. Now I know a lot of you are going to be thinking, well, what about thread and cobweb? We know there are lighter weights than lace, but no, here it starts at lace. And then super fine, fine, lightweight, medium, bulky, super bulky, and jumbo. Now, I don't know about you, but that is not a yarn weight I know many people use. I wonder if this is a section they haven't at all updated since the issue from 1989. Because if you go into a yarn shop right now, and I've gone into yarn shops both here in Europe and in the US, this is not the system they operate by. And so there's actually a line under here that offers alternative names for these categories. So types of yarns in category. Lace says fingering 10 count crochet thread. Since when did we refer to lace as fingering? Superfine sock fingering baby. Personally, I've never heard of baby weight. I've heard about baby yarns referring to soft yarns, but baby weight, okay. And then we also have sport and baby for fine. Okay, sport, we're getting there. Lightweight is called DK to light worsted, and I'm like, have you ever heard anyone refer to DK as lightweight? People usually refer to DK as kind of medium, but no, medium is worsted, Afghan and Aran. Worsted and Aran are not the same. I mean, they kind of are, but kind of not. I mean, and then we've got bulky, which underneath says chunky craft rug. Super bulky is aka super bulky and roving. And jumbo is also referred to as jumbo and roving. I don't know, guys. I'm not saying this is not a valid system. This may have been a more standardized system than what we have currently available. I mean, they are saying in this book that this yarn system comes from yarnstandards.com, so this may actually be a more standardized way of organizing yarn than what we use on social media and in yarn shops. So maybe this is more valid, but it's not what people use today, and I think that is relevant and needs to be addressed. So I was a little bit let down by that from the get-go. I just, yeah. But it has some really nice comments on, you know, that the gauges offered for these weights isn't necessarily what you have to use, and I love that they mentioned that. And they also mentioned that lace weight yarns actually aren't necessarily knit up at lace weight gauge, but often a bit looser because they are to make lace. But I just don't agree that people use terms like super fine, fine, lightweight and medium. It's just not the yarn weight system we use. The system I would like to see reflects what we see on Ravelry, and I think reflects what designer adapts their designs to be, and a lot of yarnies do as well, which is lace and whatever's below that I never use. Lace, light fingering, you know, slash 4-ply, which is the term that's used in the UK. There is sport, there is DK, there is worsted, there is Aran, then there's, you know, the bulk in the chunkies. I don't know about you, but that's more familiar to me. And I like the commentary, you know, that this isn't completely standardized. There's overlap between sport and fingering, between sport and DK, between DK and worsted, between worsted and Aran. But this needs updating, and I'm a bit let down that it wasn't updated in this book. However, I really like this section here, which refers to the name of different yarn put-ups, if you will, which really does reflect a lot of the things I've said before, but let's repeat it just for fun. This is a hank. This is a cake. This is a skein. This is a skein. This is a hank. Not a skein, it's a hank. This is a ball. This is a ball. And this is a spool. That's a spool. I think it's, I don't know, I just find it kind of amusing that we've come to call these balls, but these skeins. This is a hank. Yeah. And further in here we're being introduced to needles, and this covers needle materials in straight needles. And this is the first bit they tell us about needles. I think it's again a little bit behind in the times to set off with straight needles. I'm not saying that straight needles are now irrelevant. You see a lot of people still use them. I mean, I would like to refer you to Hori Locatelli's Hohi's journal, where she talks about how she uses straight needles and uses them very efficiently. So I'm not arguing that, but let's be real. These needles are not primary in knitting anymore. You're gonna have to look quite hard to find straight needles nowadays, and what you will find most people use is circulars. Whether they knit flat or in the round, circular is where it's at, and I think just changing the order in this book would perhaps reflect the change from the 80s until now. Aside from that, I really like how they cover the different needle materials available, so thumbs up for that. I also have some issues with the needle size table here. It's really nice that it translates from millimeters to US sizes, and it's perfectly fine by me that the UK sizing system is not here, whether it was ever included or not, because it's not used anymore. It's been wisely replaced by the metric system. However, this is clearly, and this is probably a bit of an issue I have with this book overall, is that it's a bit US centric, because it goes from 0 to 50. First of all, 00 and 000 have been removed. They're not here, and I think that will let down both metric and US sizes knitters alike. There's nothing smaller than a 0 and a 2 millimeter. And then it goes from 2 millimeter to 225, 275, 325. Where is 3? There is no 3. A 2.5 US size. It's not here. And I mean, I don't know if I have a favorite needle size, but size 3 millimeter might just be my favorite, and it's not here. So then we go to 4 millimeter, 4.5, 5, 5.5, 6, 6.5, 8. Wait, where is 7? There is no 7. And so it goes, and I'm like, surely it's not just meant for American knitters, and even in America those needles have been introduced, and you know, you see things like, oh, I don't know, 2.5 US size. I certainly found that in the States. So again, something I feel like should have been included in this updated version. And here is a very nice page for notions. There are paragraphs for each of what's illustrated here. You can clearly see that they have collaborated with Clover, but fair enough. I learned a lot from this page. There was a lot of things here I did not know what it's about, what it's for. This is for when you are seaming, you can hold your work together, which makes it a lot easier. I didn't know that because I don't seam together pieces, so I thought that was really good. Same here, they have covered, you know, a lot of blocking tools and yarn winding thingies and pom-pom makers. I don't know if bobbins is like the essential thing you need to have in knitting, but if you're doing tartar, you probably do want bobbins. So you know what, I like this section. And here's a page showing you how to hold the yarn. And this explains to me why I see a lot of people that knit English style do something a bit funny when they learn continental style, because I don't know any primarily continental knitters that do this odd tensioning here. I see that they do that here for the English style knitting, and then they just translate that to the continental knitting, and it's a completely valid way to tension your yarn, but for me as a continental knitter, it's a little bit odd. I don't know, I just hold the yarn next to my needles, but you know what, you can tension your yarn in so many ways. I am part of an online knitting group where everyone showed how they tensioned their knitting as they were knitting, and there were so many different ways of doing it, and I guess I would have liked to see that reflected here. But I also feel like this shows that this book's been written by an English style knitter, or a bunch of English style knitters, and it's a little bit lost in translation, but it's good, no complaints, just kind of a comment. The other thing I really like is this chart that is used to illustrate how stitches are a bit squat. They are a bit sort of wider than they are tall, and it's illustrated by showing the difference between how we think they are and how they actually are. Although often when you knit color work, you actually get stitches that are a bit longer than your usual stitch. So I don't know if they wrote that, but that's something that I know for a fact. And this is a very good section on cast on methods. It is not the most comprehensive section, but for being in a book that's not primarily about casting on, I think it's really good. If you want a more comprehensive book on cast on, I suggest getting the book that's called Cast On Bind Off, which is a really, really good book for that. It's one of my favorite knitting books. But the coverage in this book it's really good. I also really like the page showing how to join yarns. Anything from knitting in the ends to spit splicing, to Russian join, to magic knot. I thought that was really nice coverage of the most common ways of joining yarn. I also really like their section on increases. I like how they covered, you know, the lifted increases, they knit through the front and back loop, they make one left and make one right. Again, if you want a more comprehensive book on this, there is the increase decrease book, which is in the same series as Cast On Bind Off. But yeah, you get a pretty good rundown of these methods in here as well, and I thought that was really good. I thought that was really good. It's going to be the phrase of this book, but there's a lot of things I still have to pick on, so not to worry, we'll have a bit of snidey marks as well. In particular, bind-offs. I thought the bind-off section was, yes, good, but there's one bind-off method missing, and I don't think this is a niche method of binding off. In my experience, find it one of the go-to bind-offs in the online knitting community, and I find it very surprising that they have left it out completely. Now, it's totally fine if you've never heard of this bind-off, and from the look of this book, I don't really blame you, but I would argue it's becoming a very common bind-off. It has been the #1 recommended bind-off by Very Pink Knits on YouTube. It's really good, and it's where you knit one stitch, knit the next stitch, put them back over on the other needle and knit them together through the back loop. That's not mentioned in here. I don't know what it's called, like the stretchy bind off. It is, in my experience, the best bind off I have found to match the German twisted / old Norwegian cast on, which, by the way, has been mentioned in this book, so I am very pleased to see that, even though it's mentioned a bit further behind the other cast ons than I would have liked. But yeah, I am very disappointed that they haven't mentioned this bind off, because it's one of the easiest, stretchiest and most kind of all-purpose bind off that I know of, so I find it very strange that they've chosen not to include that in this updated version. And here is the first section of techniques. It's the cable section, and I think this section is very, very good. It is clear, it's comprehensive. It will easily explain to you what cables are and how to work them, and a lot of the things that you just need to know if you are more than average interested in cables. But let's skip straight to the color knitting section, and it kicks off with stranded knitting, and I love this section so much. I think it is very representative of what is around in stranded knitting. You see a lot of regional ways here. There's some Norwegian, there's Shetland, there's Icelandic, there's just lots of different regions well represented. There's some bohus even. I really like this, and this is my favorite part, you guys. It talks about gauge in stranded knitting, working with your colors, blocking, and traditional stranded knitting. And the first thing it covers is Fair Isle knitting. And note how it doesn't call this the Fair Isle chapter. It's called stranded knitting up here, and Fair Isle is mentioned down here as a special regional aesthetic of doing stranded knitting. And I love that so much, because while all Fair Isle knitting is stranded color work, not all stranded color work is Fair Isle. And so if you see some Scandinavian stranded color work, it is inappropriate to refer to that as Fair Isle, and I love how this book got that and included that and made that very clear without causing much of a fuss, just making it clear. And then it covers Norwegian knitting, Swedish knitting, Faroese knitting, Icelandic knitting, and so on and so on. And yeah, definitely very happy with how they have represented stranded color work in here. It shows ways to hold the yarns, which is nice. And again, things that I get asked a lot, how to hold yarn. And you know what, instead of asking me to give away all these things for free again, maybe buy a book. You know, there isn't anything wrong with getting knitting help and having to pay for it. I put a lot of color work advice in my knitting patterns, and if you have bought those patterns, there's no pressure to do so. You don't have to buy my patterns in order to watch this podcast or anything. But if you're asking me for color work help and you are asking something that is answered in my knitting pattern, the way I kind of read it is that I am doing this for free, and I'm also selling a product that I hope is going to make me a living. Yet there's someone asking me to do stuff for free, using that time that I could be using to make my living, using that to help them, because they couldn't or wouldn't buy this book or any of my patterns. And that relates to what I was touching upon earlier with our expectation to have things given to us for free in the kind of contemporary online knitting community, that I think we may need to shake off a little bit, because it's becoming a bit like, where are we expecting this stuff to come from? You know, why should people put in time to make free products when we have these books available? And while I'm pointing out minor flaws in this book throughout, because it's very important to me to reflect an honest review, it is overall a very good and comprehensive book that is giving you a lot of the answers that I get asked, and it's almost tempting to me to just refer to a print book because there's your answer. Don't expect it to be there for free. This is not a knitting class. This is just like an information and inspiration sharing. So that was my little rant there. More on that later. And here is the lace section, covering anything from yarn overs to things that are more advanced. I think the lace section is really strong, primarily just because lace isn't really something that has been invented or changed for a long time. So it makes sense that this section from the 80s is still relevant, and I suppose they maybe haven't changed much, because I don't see why it wouldn't have been good and relevant from the get-go. And now we come to a chapter on circular knitting, and this kind of threw me a little bit because I thought, really, Vogue? Have you been assuming that we've been knitting flat so far? This should probably have been a bit earlier, because as I was talking about with the needles, knitting in the round is more common now than it was back in the States and the UK back in '89. It's been common in Norway for a long time, but you see it a lot more now. People make yokes and raglans and whatnot in the round. Knitting in pieces and seaming is less relevant now. I'm not saying it's bad, I think it's really good. You know, there's been arguments about structure, if that's what you're going for, and that's true. So I think it's relevant to talk about knitting flat. Of course, I find that my skill in knitting flat has fallen a bit behind my other skills, so I'm less competent there. So it's definitely, you know, good. It's just fun a bit odd that halfway through the book we're talking about knitting in the round when that is more common now, and it sort of gives the impression that that's something like the next step up, more advanced, when I'd argue it's easier. You know, I think if you had two people that don't know how to knit at all, and you cast on some stitches for them, you work a few rounds or rows, and then you say, this is how you knit. I think the person knitting in the round will be doing a lot better than the person knitting flat. I think they will struggle a lot less because they don't have to make any turns. They could just keep knitting that one way. That's what I mean when I say it's easier. And here's a section on steeking, and again, something I get a lot of questions about, where I sometimes think to myself, check out the literature. There is so much about steeking. There's not a lack of information about steeking. You just have to look at maybe other places than where you get your free stuff, because if you want some solid explanations, you may sometimes have to cash out for it. There is books like this, there is Craftsy, and yeah, we are really fortunate to have Very Pink Knits to give away stuff for free, and she has my favorite steeking tutorial on YouTube for free, so you know, it exists. I'm just trying to make a point about this piece of information that people often ask for is available. You just kind of have to accept that it's not always going to be for free. I think I made that point clear enough. This is good. It talks about the different reinforcements, anything from just cutting to sewing with a machine. I would recommend zigzag stitches though instead of a straight stitch, just because of the flexibility in knitting, and also the crochet method. Slight downside with the crochet technique that they're showing here is that when you do those two crochet chains, it's actually gonna separate the two sides so that you will see the bars that you have to cut through very easily. Here it can seem a bit daunting, because how do you cut between them without making a mess? It's actually quite straightforward when you do it. I suppose that's an argument for video tutorials, because it's clear there. Fair point. And here is one of the new sections. It's on brioche, and I think it's good. Of course it doesn't cover 1+ brioche, because that's a yet to be fully developed technique, so I'm not like upset about anything new that isn't included in this book. Of course, that is completely reasonable that they have not included. And they have included things like double knitting and tuck stitches and other relevant and related methods next to it, which I think is very good, and the organization there makes it clear that these are interlinked. And here's a section I also feel like maybe should have been mentioned earlier, and that is gauge. Again, I talk about the order of things in this book as if that matters. People should whisk through the entire book if they get it. But I do think gauge is so important, so essential, so crucial to your knitting. It shouldn't be this far into the book, honestly. It is a very comprehensive section on gauge, showing, you know, how just different needle size on the same yarn leads to different effects. I often do get questions like that where someone asks me, oh, but what if I use thicker yarn? That could make a bigger size, then I can do size small and get size large. No, that's not how it works. In all likelihood, it will actually probably make it a bit tighter because you're using a thicker yarn. I will just, you know, make things a bit more snug. It's really down to your needle size that results in different gauge. If anything, I find that things become looser when I use finer yarns, not the other way around. So I think it's more useful, more so than yarn weights, to actually understand the relationship between needle size, yarn and gauge. Gauge is paramount. And as a tangent, guys, I'm really happy that you really took on the idea I shared, I think 2 weeks ago, where I talked about the issues of sharing needle size and needle size only when we talk about what we've knitted on a podcast. I refuse to talk about what needle size I've chosen simply because we all have our individual tension, and that leads to different gauges. So if I say I make my mittens on 3mm, I can pretty much guarantee you that you guys are gonna get mittens that are way bigger unless you knit as tight as I do. I say I knit tight, that is relatively speaking. You know, I think you can draw a normal distribution of how tight we knit, and I'm at the curve, at the end of the curve. But that doesn't mean that those in the middle are knitting standard. You know, they knit normal in a normal, in the sort of normal distribution type meaning of the word, but this isn't standardized. There is never a rule or a law that says that needle size with that yarn leads to that gauge. I am bitterly regretting relying on sunlight rather than my studio light today. It's just on and off and on and off. Ooh, the struggles of a podcaster. Which reminds me, I'm gonna do an extra after this where I talk about how to podcast, by the way. This section is brilliant. It's about correcting errors, and I think everyone needs to have this book just because of that section. Done. Related to that, I also like the section that talks about picking up stitches. That is something where my knowledge is still lacking, because I tend not to choose construction methods that use that. But lately I have done that more so when I find myself a little bit lost, because the pattern will not necessarily tell you how to do that, because it's one of those things that it expects you to know, which I think is totally fair, because if you do want to know how to do something in more depth than a pattern that just says do this, you get a book like this and it will tell you everything. And I think that's totally reasonable. And here's the section on short row shaping. And I have 2 comments to make about that. One is that they put this in the design section. And the design section is like a separate chapter about how to design your own garments, which is also very, very good. Why did they not put short row techniques up with, you know, increases and decreases and cast-ons and bind-offs? Oh well, it's here, it's good. And for a while I was really scared that they had let out German short rows. I did not see any German short rows. I was like, oh, how could they? First my favorite bind offs and now this. Well, they have. They just called it double stitch short row, which is actually a pretty good name. I'm generally against regional names for techniques. Like, I think German short rows could definitely be called double stitch short row, because what we make with German short rows is double stitches. Not to be confused with double knitting or DK weight yarn, by the way. Same goes for the old Norwegian cast on and the German twisted cast on. They're the same, and I don't get why we just don't call it the long tail twisted cast on, because that's essentially what it is. Same with continental and English style knitting. I find it would make sense for us to just call it picking, flicking, throwing, etc. That's just me. So I am very happy about the short row section. Turns out, when I found my German short rows in there. And the design section does cover other things than knitting flat and seaming. It covers top-down methods and knitting things in the round. So very happy with that. It does give the impression that this is an up-to-date book, despite the few little things I have picked on, just because I am me. And I also like the buttonhole section. It even includes my favorite, the 1 row horizontal buttonhole, which I thought was really niche. I was surprised to find that in here. So happy to say that it's included. And this bit made me laugh, you guys. Shoulder pads. I mean, you can take a book out of 1989, but can you really take 1989 out of the book? Oh, I guess you can't really argue for them to take it out. It's cute that it's there. And this is fantastic, a shawl shaping section. I mean, if you're into designing shawls, then look no further. I really like these illustrations. They are beautiful. And there are a lot of others in here as well. Let me show you. yeah, we've got wraps, we've got pie shawls, we've got shuttered shawls, or haps if you will. This is good. This is good. And there's a section on different hats, and the illustrations are so cute. And yes, there's a section for deciding your own mitts and mittens and gloves and what have you. Also for socks, there we have it. And yes, they cover top down knitting and toe up knitting. Brilliant. So that is really all I have to say about this book. I hope you feel like you have sort of familiarized yourself with the book. If you maybe find reasons to buy a book like this, I mean, if you're happy with the free content you get online, then by all means stick to what you know online, no problem. That's, you know, up to individual preference. But the way I see it is, if you come to expect the internet to provide you with the stuff you find in this book, then maybe it's time for a change of yeah, thinking about that kind of thing, because I think we need to respect the hard work that goes behind making something like this, and not expect or get frustrated rather when the internet doesn't provide it for us for free, that this is worth paying for. And I'm saying that as someone who was given this book for free. Mind you, that was after I have bought it twice and also bought Knitopedia. So I'm not just coming from a place of like product placement and saying, I got this for free, you should buy it. You know, I have, like I said earlier, made this purchase a few times, and I was very happy to be given the third version of this book in my case for free. So those are my thoughts. If you have any questions, then do let me know, since I have the book and you may not, but obviously not overstepping the boundaries I talked about earlier, because the internet's become a funny place. I thought that was really interesting. If you have listened to the latest episode of A Playful Day, which is recently one of my favorite audio podcasts, which is not directly about knitting, but it does, you know, revolve around crafts, and you know, it's hosted by the partner of Isolde Teague, who is a very well-known knitwear designer, so that makes sense. And she interviews a lot of crafters, but also a lot of other people who have interesting stories to share. And in her latest episode, that was in relation to Pride Month, she interviewed her girlfriend, and they talked about, you know, how the internet has changed from the early days of Isolde's work to today, where people have come to expect more things for free. And I thought that was really interesting commentary, which may or may not have inspired my little don't expect things for free rant. But more than that, I'm gonna get to that in a bit. We're done with the review. Thanks for watching. I have a bit of a ramble to come with in relation to the Tits collective, and you may not have heard about this, and I'm gonna say tits a lot in this part, so if you are done with the knitting bits, if you are waiting for more yarny bits to come out, I am done with that for this episode. I have no acquisitions to show, I have no more projects to show. I am just going to talk a little bit about originality, doing stuff for free or not, and the Tits collective. So as some of you will already have heard of, Countess Ablaze, who is by far one of my favorite dyers, who I have so much respect for, has started this thing called the Tits Collective. And it is essentially a reaction to not just one incident, but a general tendency for hand-dyed colorways to be copied. And she's turned it into a very positive thing, where it brings focus to charity and originality. So I'm going to tell a bit of a backstory here. The Countess was contacted by some fairly misogynistic people that expected her to dye yarn and give it away for free in exchange for exposure. So she got very angry, reasonably so, and decided in response to that to just do her own charity instead of doing these people's charitable work, and dye up two colorways called Shit Tea and Tray Bake. If I want exposure, I will get my tits out. And they have sold really well. I did not get around to buy some myself because for some reason I thought they were only available in single ply merino, and I'm kind of done with that. Turns out I could have gotten it on other bases. Hindsight, anyway, it was a really cool movement and response to the expectation that we creative, crafty people should do things for free. See the common thread here? And it became a huge internet phenomena in our knitting community. and the money that that yarn earned her was given to charity, specifically to you know, victims of domestic abuse, to shelters for women who are yeah, experiencing that. And it's helped at least 2 women that we know of, and it's just been a really positive thing. And so it was a bit of a letdown to find that this one of the colorways having been, shall we say, appropriated by someone else. And I'm not going to go into that. I don't think there's much point in talking about, oh, which dyers are good and original and which dyers are the mean rip-offies and stuff like that. I see it as an opportunity to talk about how we view copying and originality in our knitting community in general. I think it's a culture issue more so than an individual issue. So what's happened in this case is that Countess Ablaze has decided to let everyone dye their take on her "if I want exposure I will get my tits out," and they will all kind of mutually promote one another, and everyone has to give at least £3 of the earnings to charity, a charity of their choice. And I think it's a really positive reaction to this, especially because the Countess is not going to dye that colorway herself anymore. So we get to see lots of other versions of it, and a lot of people are now going to be like trying to catch them all, so to speak. So I think that's very positive, and I have certainly debated myself whether to make myself a design for this that I will be putting up on Ravelry. If I get around to it, I will do that. I have sent the Countess a email saying that I'm on board and this is my idea. If I have time, I will do that, and that is my plan. But there's a caution that I, you know, may not have time because I have a lot of obligations, and that is why you haven't seen that much knitting in this episode, because I've been doing too many things that is, you know, for things that I will be showing you later. But I have some comments on this whole originality issue that I thought I would share with you. I understand while on my Instagram feed the reactions around this whole Tits collective has been very positive, I understand there have been some reactions as to how this, you know, could potentially reflect upon exposing someone for having done something not quite nice to one dyer, and that's not what it's about. It's completely removed the focus of like individual blame onto a focus on the charity, in whatever charity you choose to support, and the charities that the Countess has been advocating, and also on originality. I mean, I know a bunch of indie dyers and a lot of really successful ones that have roaring businesses, and that's really great. And I do also happen to know that they have pretty much all at one point or another, or several, had other dyers copy their colorways, and there's really nothing you can do at that point. You can't, you know, report them to the colorway police or anything. There's only so many ways that you can dye, and at some point you will see some style coming up again. And to some extent you could say, oh, but you know, everyone's kind of copying hedgehog fiber style, and well, where would anyone be before, you know, Woolmice? So in a way, yeah, we're kind of all copying. So it depends how you want to define copying, where is copying and where is kind of taking ideas and turning them into your own. Where do we draw the line there? But in the cases with the dyers that I know who have been copied, it's literally been doing the same colorway and calling it something with nearly the same name, and it's sort of been very hard to deny that it's been anything else. And in these cases, I don't think it comes down to, like I said, those dyers being bad people and unoriginal and people that you need to put on your blacklist. I don't think that. I often respect all dyers in these cases, and I think it doesn't reflect anything of them. I think it reflects something in our creative community that we need to talk about. I think we need to talk about how copying the products that we sell, it's not like copying drawings in kindergarten, you know. It is unprofessional behavior, and I think because we get so excited and creative and have so much fun, we forget the more serious aspects of having to be professional, and that's not always fun, and it can stifle your creativity when you know that there's something that you cannot do. And I often also find that with designing, you know, there are like this 20% rule that people seem to believe in, that if you just change the pattern by 20% or 30% or whatever number they come up with, then you can legally copy that pattern and just make some alterations and call it your own. And that is a myth. I don't know where that came from. It's a myth, the way that myth that you only use 10% of your brain, you know. It's just not true. It's made up, and the sad news is that there's actually very little that protects your knitting pattern, and that's not really fun. And so I've had thoughts about that in the past myself as well. Like there was one instance where I had made an alteration to a pattern, but the alteration was to the extent that someone could not do what I had done unless that those instructions were given to them. And so I felt a bit uneasy there. Like, what do you do when you have come up with something that someone else really came up with, but your version is your version, but it's still fairly obvious where it came from? In my case, I chose to message the original designer and say, what can I do to share this? And I realized in hindsight I should not have phrased it that way, because what you do when you find that you want to make something and someone has done that before you is put them in a bit of a difficult spot where they almost feel like they have to say yes. And I had that once before as well. Someone asked me if they could share an aspect of my pattern in a different setting, and I was so baffled by the question I just said yes. But in hindsight I shouldn't really have said that, because I was just accepting someone to use my work for free. So it can be a bit awkward, and in this case that designer chose not to respond to me, which is kind of answer enough. But if I'm to be a bit critical of my own behavior there, I should really have phrased it from her point of view and said, I understand this is your design, and if you want to share this as an extra chart in your pattern, that's fine by me. If you have any other suggestion of how this instruction can be shared, then do let me know. And so if she had suggested I could sell it as my own pattern, and maybe then it would have been okay. So that was one example of how this 20% rule, or whatever you want to call it, doesn't really apply. Because yeah, sure, I had changed more than 20% of the pattern, but if it is so close to that original design, maybe just don't, just leave it. But if in doubt, you can contact the original maker and see what happens. And it can also be quite difficult to know what to do if you see someone who has copied you. Like, what do you do? If you contact someone who's copied you, it could actually make things rather awkward, because in essence you are contacting someone about something that isn't very nice, and that someone may actually look up to you, and so they get a message from their idol saying, boo, I don't like what you do. And that can really hurt. It can hurt more than a random stranger coming up to you, and it makes things just very difficult. And sometimes those of us who are the makers can be a bit shy of confrontation. And so it really would help if we had a bigger agreement of what kind of copying is and is not okay. I mean, I've experienced being ripped off myself. I chose to not talk about it here on the podcast because, quite frankly, often when you say, oh, this dyer copied my colorway, or this designer copied my design, or this notions maker copied my notion, whatever, you're making people a bit paranoid, and you can often get people, oh, was it that design? Was it that? Was it you? Wasn't that? That was a bit similar, was that? And you kind of, it can be a bit difficult. So I chose not to talk about it, but it feels quite relevant to bring up now, because essentially what happened was that one design of mine had been modified by including a conceptual aspect of another design of mine, and I found that this person had purchased both of them from me, so it was not a coincidence, and it came up just after I had launched mine. It was a blatant copy, but I'm sort of like, oh, I don't know, maybe this is okay. Is it like enough change to be not mine? I don't know, but I clearly recognize my own work. I mean, I could see on the photo that all of it was mine. It was just been rejigged. And I asked people, you know, do you agree? Do you agree? And everyone agreed, and the best thing forward was to contact this person. However, what happened was that this person lashed out against me and said, how dare you accuse me of this stuff? And I'm so disappointed that someone I looked up to would do this, and was completely enraged and wrote a long rant. And I was just going, oh no, I've been mean. And I was just like, what is... And it took me another week to figure out a response, only to find I had been blocked by this person. And I thought I'd send out an email because, you know, they purchased patterns of mine, so I had their PayPal email. to clarify, make sure this person wasn't scared of me and what I would do, because I'm not in the business of like grading someone for having done something that maybe they thought was okay. But when I chose to email them, I was just told that they were uncomfortable with me contacting them and asked me to never contact them again, as if I was harassing them. And so when we leave all of these issues of dyers and designers and whoever makes something in our community to deal with these things on their own as individual cases, I think we are ignoring the bigger kind of umbrella issues of this being a systemic problem in our creative community. And I suspect it would help more if we actually talked about this, not in terms of those bad people and those bad people, but saying, what can we do to change the perception about this? Where do we draw the line of what kind of copying is okay and what kind of copying is straight up replication and not acceptable? I mean, straight up replication is never okay. If you've done the exact same thing as someone else and pass it on as your own, it's just not okay. We're not okay with that. That's something we can all agree with. But let's say we have someone who, oh, I don't know, came up with a raglan for the first time. Let's say the raglan doesn't exist up until this point and this one designer does a raglan design. Can nobody else do raglans then? Like, what do we do then? I find it difficult, honestly, and let's say something reinvents the raglan today. That's more realistic, I suppose, because raglans exist. Can we do the same thing? Like, if someone shapes a raglan better, can the next person shape it better? I don't know. Like, I am following this Elizabeth Dorothy book that I have, where she has reshaped the top-down short row sleeve caps. And I think it's really brilliant. Can I do that? I don't know. And so I think if in doubt, ask the designer. Say what you're planning to do, ask if it's okay. And what you're probably going to be asked to is say, yeah, it's okay, but credit the person who came up with the idea. And if you credit each other, we are actively lifting each other up, and that is the best way to deal with this, I think. And that is why I am so happy with the Tits Collective, because each and every dyer are now supporting one another, and that is brilliant. And I'm so happy to see this reaction to something that could have easily turned in a completely different negative direction, and it's just not, and it's awesome. So now I've raised a bunch of questions and I haven't really provided that many answers. What do we do? What is okay? What is not okay? And my general rule of thumb is, if the original maker can recognize their work, and believe me, someone who has put in a lot of time and effort to develop something will recognize their own work when it is being reappropriated by someone else. And so if it is to that extent, then you should probably either not have done it or talk to the designer or something of the kind. And I think that is the best way forward. And of course, in some cases, some people just come up with the same idea at the same time. That can totally happen. That happened to me very recently, where me and a designer who I believe we mutually admire one another's work, and she just put up a design when I was like, I have a design that looks a lot like that and test it right now. Oh. And so what I did, I just sent her a message showing the photo of my finished product and said, oh, looks like we've been having the same idea. And this person was a bit like, okay, what do we do? I didn't rip you off, I promise. I'm like, I know, you wouldn't have seen this before. I haven't seen yours before, it's fine. And so we just gifted each other some patterns and that was done. Like, and I promise, you know, if anyone ever had a reaction to either of our designs resembling the others, then I could just clarify that it just happened and that's okay. Nobody, you know, has a first comes first served kind of right to using a stitch dictionary, for instance. So, you know, that is a way of dealing with that, I think, to just be open and not try to hide away and hope nobody finds out. Because if you are, you know, honest, and your process to developing your design or whatever you make has been honest, it's fine. I think you'll be fine. So just to kind of repeat what I think is the takeaway message from this very long rant is, if the original maker recognizes their work in your work and you haven't at all discussed it with them, that is probably where you need to reconsider if what you've done is okay. Because this isn't just fun, it's not just creativity. You can do whatever you want when you're not trying to make money of it, but if you're selling a product and that product is just an alteration of someone else's product, being yarn or designs or project bags, have a think, you know, just draw a breath and be like, what is the best way forward here? What would I do if this other maker that I'm influenced by was my friend? You know, maybe that would help. Or maybe sometimes we think it's more okay to rip our friends. I don't know if that's the case. I don't think that's the case. But I think I need to round off this little ramble now. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it gave you some food for thought. Feel free to disagree with me if you do. That's totally fine. I would rather this become a discussion than someone's opportunity to just go. But that's just me and my thinking. And sort of see where I'm coming from when I want to do a newsletter and a blog, because sometimes I have so many thoughts and things I want to say that I want to put into writing and maybe a more discussion format, rather than just throw it all up here on YouTube for you guys to vote up or down, which can be a bit daunting. So if you want, we can discuss this in the comment section below. By the way, comment section below in the Q&A that I had last week, a lot of people supplied me with resources for Danish traditional knitting, and so those of you who are curious about that, I suggest going back to that video and check out the comment section. I think it was my Q&A video part 1, could have been part 2, not entirely sure there, I'm sorry, but there will be a lot of comments commenting on good resources for Danish knitting, you know, primarily books. Books are good, if you haven't taken that away from this episode yet. So that is all I have to say today. Thank you all so much for watching. Do not forget, I have a pattern out on Ravelry with the discount code. I will be making another video talking about how to podcast, and aside from that, I will see you next time. Bye!